Hello and welcome back to the Buchla Easel tutorial series. We're finishing off our look at effects today. So we're starting with the saturation effects. Here's Overdrive. At the moment the effect is off. So we have our simple sawtooth wave. When I turn the effect on, we're basically introducing clipping to the wave. We're distorting the wave, adding gain to it, which causes distortion. Now distortion isn't a unique thing in its own right. It's merely the addition of extra harmonics to the signal. But because the harmonics are atonally distributed, in other words, they're not particularly based on a pitched tone, we hear them as what would ultimately become noise if we added enough of them in. But a little bit of harmonic disruption is nice. We like the extra colour. And then if you go too far, it sounds too nasty and it becomes unpleasant. So Overdrive is all about finding that sweet spot of how many harmonics to add to the sound, still maintain its character. So we can see the majority of the disruption is caused in the upper frequencies. And as I increase the tone knob, see all of those upper frequencies, the entire mass of higher frequencies. There's quite a steep step on this control, I find, towards the end. Kind of falls off a cliff. Essentially, it's a glorified low-pass filter. Now, probably the most ineffectual control in this entire synthesizer is the drive knob on this unit. It basically adds extra gain to the signal and you can see it, but I struggle to really hear much of a difference. I mean, we're dealing with a sawtooth wave here. There's a lot of harmonic content to play with. And you can see it adding the extra harmonics. But if we have a look at it in an oscilloscope, it's actually quite a subtle shaping of the wave that's taking place. The output knob is really just an additional gain control or volume control to equalize the non-overdriven sound with the overdriven sound so that you can equalize those volumes if you want to turn this effect on and off. Now the oscilloscope really comes into its own when we're talking about the destroy module, because it lets you really clearly see what this thing's doing. Destroy is all about throwing away digital quality. So these are parameters that could never possibly exist in the old analog-based Buchla world. This is a digital kind of thing. The controls that you can see set up on the screen at the moment result in the effect having the minimum possible effect. So start again with the effect off. That's what our sawtooth wave looks like. And you can see even with I've set all of these controls to as minimal impact as I possibly can, and even then we're having some tonal effect on the sound. And what's happening is that we're throwing away parts of the information. Some of the digital information is being discarded. Now let's deal with each of these controls in turn and see what they all do. Clipping first. This is literally going to hard chop. Imagine the garbage compactor in Star Wars. It's going to come in and it's going to squash this wave smaller and smaller. And eventually we end up with almost nothing. Almost none of the frequencies are allowed to escape. Now that digital clipping is almost always considered an exclusively bad thing. You know, you're never allowed to go past zero when you're recording vocals or some kind of, live instrument, because that information is just fundamentally lost. You try to avoid this when you're recording data, and then if you want to apply it later as an effect, as we're doing here, that's fine, but just be very careful that this is a brutal effect, completely arbitrarily chopping the wave down. The next one along, bit reduction, is the most visual effect of any that you could possibly imagine. Watch what this does. So ordinarily the Buchla has a 32-bit resolution, which means that it can contain something like 4 billion. I used to know what the number is, but it's a very large number of different amplitudes that can be recorded. As you reduce the bit rate lower and lower, eventually when you get down to a bit rate of 2, it's either on or off, and you've basically got just almost no control over the volume of the signal. So it's how many different amplitude steps we're allowed to render the wave in, and the fewer we have to play with, the less accurately we can represent the sound that we're trying to emulate. Tone is really simple, that's just a tone knob. Easier to see that in Insight. It's just an LPF, throws the high frequencies away. Straightforward enough. And gain is also pretty straightforward. This is just a compensation control to allow us to equalize the volumes once we've finished with the rest of the effect. Raises and lowers the amplitude of the entire thing. So whereas bit reduction is dealing with amplitudes, how many different snapshots of amplitude can we take, resampling is all about how many different snapshots we take. This kind of rate, we've got almost no resolution at all. So it kind of doesn't matter what key I play on the keyboard. I'll go from C to C. It doesn't have enough granularity of photographs that it's taking of the sound to actually work out what the frequency is. Harmonic distortion is the last one. And this literally just adds arbitrary extra frequencies to the sound, further mess with the tone that the synth is trying to generate. In the manual it refers to the distortion of harmonic balance. Basically it's just like chucking almost, I don't know if it's random frequencies, but there's some algorithm in there that's clearly not completely random, just extra content. You see it shaping the wave. So very, very nasty unit indeed, naughty unit. Parametric EQ is very simple. You've seen EQ units in many situations, I'm sure, but let's have a quick look at it. Here's the Insight. So low gain, boosts the low. You can just about see it, there you go, being attenuated and boosted. And here's the frequency around which that boost will occur. There's our mid gain, and the mid frequency is being boosted or cut. Don't forget this can cut as well. And we also have a mid width, which basically either flattens it out or intensifies the cut slash boost. And finally high frequency. There's the high gain right at the very end. There it is coming in. Now I have something of a dubious relationship with compressors in synthesizers, because to me a compressor is primarily an acoustic tool, and it's actually a completely fundamentally essential one. If you're recording something like vocals or guitars, you need to be able to control the level of the signal in that environment. It's completely essential and probably the most important effect. In the synth world, not so much, because everything is constrained within the device itself. But having said that, there's a few quirks about the Buchla's compressor that I need to discuss. Firstly, by default, the input knob is set to 12 o'clock and you see 0 dB. If I turn the compressor off, I've just got a pulsar going into the modulation oscillator here, so I'm just generating, set it to trigger, just a really simple pulsed signal. See how big the wave is? Turn the compressor on with both input and makeup set to 0, and basically turn the rest of the compressor off. It's a massive signal. This input knob I think is just plain wrong. I think it should be all the way down, what says -12, to actually be having no effect on the sound. So just bear in mind that when you turn this thing on, don't trust this input knob, I think it's wrong. So once you've got your input and output levels, your makeup gain, basically compensating for any amount of signal you're going to throw away in the compressor, we've got a usable tool now. If I bring the threshold all the way down, so it's going to compress, whatever it's going to do, it's going to do every single signal it receives, everything above -50 dB, which is basically everything. If I now start turning the ratio dial up, it's going to start squashing this sound. It's going to get smaller and smaller. So all signals above the threshold rate are attenuated at the rate of 4:1. However big the signal would be, it's 4 times smaller. And you can increase this ratio all the way to essentially infinity. You've squashed the wave to oblivion. So what you're supposed to do is sounds that come in loud. Let's say you've got a previous effect, maybe your bit crusher or something doing something absolutely brutally violent. You put a compressor after it to make sure that no signal out of that effects unit ever goes past a level that you're comfortable with, and you control that value with your ratio. So the more you turn the ratio up, the more the signal is squashed. Once you've squashed the signal, you're supposed to use makeup, that's why it's called makeup gain rather than simply output, to bring the signal back to what it would have been had it not been compressed in the first place. And now you can see we've got a very different kind of beast. Now that it's going through the compressor, we've got the release cycle kind of allowing the compressor to gently let go. I'm completely confused by this release knob. It seems to be back to front to me. I just don't understand it at all. That is a gently fading wave disappearing to nothing over a period of time. I turn the release knob all the way up, then it's a much briefer attenuation. If somebody can tell me why I'm misunderstanding what this knob does, I would be grateful, because to me it looks like it's backwards. That is releasing the compressor over a long period of time. That said, attack is the opposite way around. So this is how quickly the compressor kicks in. So at a second, the unprocessed signal, which is now way too big, is getting through before the compressor has an opportunity to act. So it's no longer, the signal is no longer being compressed, and that like massive signal, because I applied so much makeup gain, is escaping. So the attack control specifies how quickly the compression is applied, and as I bring that in, you can hear it kind of just immediately acting on the sound. And you get that really sharp kind of popping sound. So compressors in a synth world, meh, but you know, that's what it does. Finally, reverb. Everybody knows what reverb does. So pre-delay is how much time elapses before the reverb even begins, and you can end up with a weird kind of delay effect if you turn this up. So all the way down at 0, we're going to get the reverb immediately, and at 500 milliseconds, I'm pressing the note, and then we eventually hear the signal. Now the reason why you're not hearing any of the original signal at all is because we're all the way wet at the moment. So if I bring this effect down to 50%, you'll get the original signal, and then the reverb bounces in. There's your half a second delay. Bing. The tone knob allows us to specify whether or not we want to accentuate or emphasize low or high frequencies. I'll set it all the way back to wet, so we're only hearing the reverb sound, and I've given myself a bit more signal by putting the pulser on hold. So now we're only hearing the lowest of the tones from the pulse, from the sawtooth wave. Turn it all the way up, you just hear the nasty tinny stuff. and tame, which is one of the weirder named buttons, turns it into a high pass, a band pass filter. So now the knob determines where the band pass frequencies are centralized. Gain is pretty self-evident. Room size, very small chamber to massive kind of cathedral sort of thing. And width is our stereo effect. And it doesn't take very long. I've just spent maybe 30 seconds twiddling some of the controls there to find pretty nice reverb sound. That's not bad. That's it for the effects bank. Hope you found the video useful. If you did, please consider subscribing, hit notifications. You'll be sure not to miss the next episode. Hope to see you then. Thanks a lot.